For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On the morning of March 15, 1992, 35-year-old Whitney Garcia set up her research camp in a secluded valley of Chile's Torres del Paine National Park. The acclaimed wildlife biologist and documentary filmmaker was conducting what should have been a routine study of the region's elusive puma population. 3 days after missing her scheduled radio check-in, rangers found her base camp untouched, but Whitney had vanished without a trace. Despite an extensive search operation across the rugged Patagonian wilderness and involvement from both Chilean and American authorities, the investigation went cold. For 26 years, Whitney's disappearance remained one of the region's most perplexing mysteries. Then, in 2018, a discovery in the remote Andes would unravel a dark web of corruption and criminal enterprise that reached far beyond the pristine wilderness Whitney had devoted her life to protecting. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Whitney Garcia. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. The vast expanse of Torres del Paine stretched endlessly beneath the Patagonian sky, its jagged peaks piercing through wisps of morning clouds. It was here, among these ancient mountains, that Whitney Garcia made her final radio transmission on June 15, 1992. Her voice crackled through the static, steady and enthusiastic, as she described a fresh set of puma tracks she discovered near the eastern ridge. Whitney was no stranger to the wilderness. At 35, she had already established herself as one of the most respected wildlife biologists in her field, with a particular expertise in large cat species of South America. Her current project, documenting the declining puma populations in the Chilean Andes, had brought her to this remote valley in Torres del Paine National Park. The morning of her disappearance began like any other. She radioed in to base camp at precisely 700 hours, following the strict safety protocols she'd always adhered to throughout her career. The transmission lasted exactly 4 minutes and 23 seconds. She reported clear weather conditions, described her planned route for the day, and mentioned her excitement about the fresh tracks she'd found. It would be the last time anyone heard her voice. 3 days passed without Whitney's scheduled check-in. Park Ranger Miguel Santos was the first to notice something was wrong. The silence was uncharacteristic for Whitney, who was known for her meticulous attention to safety procedures and communication schedules. When the search team finally reached her base camp on June 18, they found an eerily undisturbed scene. Her main tent stood exactly as it should, properly secured against the fierce Patagonian winds. Inside, her sleeping bag was neatly rolled, and her journal lay open on a small folding table, the last entry dated June 15. A half-drunk cup of coffee had long since gone cold, and her satellite phone remained in its charging cradle. Only her day pack, camera equipment, and tracking gear were missing. The search began immediately. Sheriff Eduardo Morales of the Chilean National Police coordinated with park authorities to establish a search grid covering nearly 50 square kilometers of treacherous terrain. Helicopter surveys revealed nothing but endless stretches of rocky outcrops and dense vegetation. Ground teams battled harsh winds and near-freezing temperatures as they combed the surrounding valleys. What puzzled investigators most was the complete lack of disturbance at the camp. Whitney's research materials were perfectly organized, her supply stores untouched. Even her emergency beacon remained in its protective case, never activated. It was as if she had simply vanished into the vast Patagonian wilderness. As days turned into weeks, theories began to emerge. Some suggested she might have fallen into one of the region's numerous crevasses while tracking pumas. Others pointed to the possibility of a wildlife encounter gone wrong. But the evidence, or rather the lack thereof, painted a more disturbing picture. Whitney Garcia, with her 15 years of field experience, had seemingly walked into the mountains and disappeared without a trace. The initial search lasted 28 days, the longest in Torres del Paine's history. Teams from Chile and Argentina worked tirelessly, employing everything from thermal imaging to trained search dogs. But the harsh landscape kept its secrets, offering no clues to Whitney's fate. Her ex-husband, Grant Garcia, arrived from San Francisco on the fourth day of the search. As a marine biologist, he understood the risks of field research all too well. Whitney wasn't just experienced, she was exceptional, he told the search coordinators. She knew these mountains better than most locals. This wasn't a simple accident. As June turned to July and the brutal Patagonian winter tightened its grip on the region, hope began to fade. The search was officially scaled back on July 13, 1992. Whitney Garcia's disappearance became another mystery in the long history of Torres del Paine, a reminder of nature's unforgiving power and the vulnerability of those who dare to explore its depths. No one could have predicted that it would take 26 years for the truth to emerge, or that Whitney's final discovery would prove far more dangerous than any natural hazard the mountains could present. The torn tent found in 2018 would finally begin to unravel a story far darker than anyone had imagined. The first 48 hours of any missing persons investigation are crucial, and Sheriff Eduardo Morales knew this better than most. As dawn broke over Torres del Paine on June 19, 1992, he stood at Whitney Garcia's base camp, methodically piecing together the researchers' last known movements. The camp itself told a story of meticulous organization. Whitney's research notes revealed she had been tracking 3 different Puma territories, marking their locations on a detailed topographical map. Her last recorded coordinates placed her approximately 4 kilometers northeast of base camp, in an area known locally as the Devil's Backbone, a treacherous ridge of weathered granite and loose scree. Grant Garcia arrived by helicopter that afternoon, his face drawn with worry but his mind sharp with purpose. As he moved through Whitney's camp, he provided invaluable insights into her methods and habits. Whitney always maintained a secondary GPS unit in her day pack, he explained to Morales. She never relied on a single piece of equipment. That's what makes this so strange. She was prepared for almost any emergency. The search teams faced brutal conditions. Wind gusts exceeded 60 kilometers per hour, and temperatures dropped well below freezing at night. Visibility was often limited to mere meters, with fog rolling in unpredictably from the mountains. Despite these challenges, over 40 trained searchers combed the terrain, working in coordinated grids. On the 5th day of the search, a potential lead emerged. A team discovered fresh boot prints matching the tread pattern of Whitney's hiking boots, leading toward a steep ravine. The tracks disappeared at the edge of a rocky outcrop, leaving searchers to question whether she had changed direction or met with misfortune at this point. Morales ordered an extensive examination of the area. Rope teams descended the ravine while others searched the surrounding plateaus. They found nothing, no equipment, no signs of disturbance, no indication of what might have happened to Whitney Garcia. The investigation took an unexpected turn when local guides reported unusual helicopter activity in the region during the week of Whitney's disappearance. These flights hadn't been logged with park authorities, and their purpose remained unknown. However, without concrete evidence linking these mysterious flights to Whitney's disappearance, the lead ultimately proved inconclusive. As the search continued, 2 competing theories emerged. The first, supported by several experienced park rangers, suggested Whitney had suffered an accident in the treacherous terrain, perhaps a fall in an area where her body couldn't be easily spotted. The second theory, which Sheriff Morales found increasingly compelling, pointed to foul play. The complete absence of emergency signal activation, combined with Whitney's extensive experience, suggested something, or someone had prevented her from calling for help. Grant Garcia vehemently supported the second theory, Whitney knew these mountains, he insisted during a particularly tense strategy meeting. She respected them, but she didn't fear them. She would have activated her beacon if she could. Something stopped her. The investigation expanded to include interviews with every park employee and researcher in the area during the time of Whitney's disappearance. Background checks were run, movements were verified, but no clear suspects emerged. The case began to feel like trying to catch smoke. The more intensely they pursued answers, the more elusive they became. By the end of the second week, the search had covered over 70 square kilometers of challenging terrain. Helicopter fuel costs mounted, search teams grew exhausted, and hope began to dim. Sheriff Morales found himself facing the most difficult decision in his career, determining when to scale back the search efforts. The weather, as if sensing the investigation's momentum, turned viciously hostile. A series of storms swept through the region, dropping temperatures further and making aerial searches impossible. Each passing day decreased the likelihood of finding Whitney alive, and the investigation began its slow, reluctant transition from rescue to recovery. What no one knew then was that the real answers lay not in the immediate vicinity of Whitney's camp, but in the darker corners of Torres del Paine's vast expanse. The truth would remain hidden for decades, buried beneath layers of silence and corruption that ran far deeper than anyone suspected. As summer faded into autumn across Torres del Paine, the search for Whitney Garcia gradually diminished to sporadic patrols and occasional flyovers. The harsh reality of limited resources and mounting costs forced Sheriff Morales to officially scale back the investigation by late August 1992. The vast Patagonian wilderness had swallowed all traces of the accomplished biologist, leaving behind only questions and theories. Grant Garcia remained in Chile for 2 months, refusing to accept the inevitable conclusion that his ex-wife might never be found. He spent his savings on private searches, hired local guides, and plastered the nearby towns with posters bearing Whitney's image. Each morning, he would stand at the edge of her last known location, scanning the horizon as if the mountains might finally reveal their secret. The media coverage, which had initially sparked international interest, began to wane. Whitney's story became just another headline, relegated to brief mentions on slow news days. The scientific community felt her absence. Deeply researched projects were left unfinished, and her groundbreaking work on puma population dynamics remained incomplete. By December 1992, the case file had grown thick with dead ends. Sheriff Morales kept it on his desk longer than protocol demanded, but eventually, even he had to concede. The file was officially transferred to cold case status, joining other unsolved mysteries in the archives of the Chilean National Police. The years that followed brought subtle changes to Torres del Paine. New safety protocols were implemented for solo researchers, and stricter check-in procedures became mandatory. Whitney's disappearance had left an indelible mark on the park's history, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires and ranger stations. Grant returned to San Francisco, but he never stopped searching for answers. Every year, he would make the journey back to Patagonia, spending his vacation time retracing old search patterns and following up on the faintest rumors. He established a small foundation in Whitney's name, dedicated to protecting the pumas she had devoted her life to studying. The local scientific community felt her absence keenly. Research proposals that might have built upon her work were abandoned or modified. The puma population studies she had initiated remained unfinished, creating a gap in the understanding of these magnificent predators' behavior patterns. Sheriff Morales kept in touch with Grant, sending brief updates whenever anything remotely relevant crossed his desk. Most were false leads, confused sightings, misidentified equipment found by hikers, or simple cases of mistaken identity. Each dead end seemed to seal the case more firmly in its cold status. As the years passed, the mystery of Whitney Garcia became part of local folklore. Tour guides would point out the general area where she was last seen, adding her story to the rich tapestry of Torres del Paine's history. Some claim to have seen lights in the mountains where no climber would venture, while others spoke of unexplained equipment found in remote valleys. The case file gathered dust in the archives, its pages yellowing with time. The photographs of Whitney's camp grew faded, and the urgency of the initial investigation became a distant memory. But beneath the surface, unseen by those who had investigated her disappearance, forces were at work that would eventually bring the truth to light. The real story lay hidden in the remote corners of the park, in the shadows of illegal activities that Whitney had unknowingly stumbled upon. The torn tent that would be discovered in 2018 already existed somewhere in the vast expanse of Torres del Paine, holding its secrets until time and circumstance would finally reveal them to the world. For 26 years, the case remained dormant, a testament to the power of silence and the effectiveness of fear. Those who knew the truth spoke nothing, protected by distance and the passage of time. The mountains kept their secret, while Whitney's true fate remained hidden beneath layers of deception that would take decades to unravel. The morning of March 12, 2018, began routinely for Torres del Paine Rangers Carlos Mendoza and Sofia Ruiz as they conducted their seasonal trail maintenance in the park's eastern sector. The late summer sun had barely crested the mountains when Sofia noticed something unusual protruding from beneath a rock overhang. A flash of faded orange synthetic material that didn't belong among the natural landscape. What they discovered would shatter 26 years of silence. Wedged beneath the overhang was a torn tent, its fabric weathered but still intact enough to identify it as high-end wilderness gear from the early 1990s. The damage to the tent wasn't consistent with animal activity or natural deterioration. Long, clean cuts suggested human intervention. Inside the tent, protected from the worst of the elements, lay a waterproof field journal and a folded topographical map. The journal's pages contained Whitney Garcia's distinctive handwriting, but it wasn't her regular research notes that caught the rangers' attention. The final pages contained detailed coordinates, times, and dates, alongside a list of names written in hurried script. The map was marked with locations that didn't correspond to any official park trails or research sites. When wildlife crime investigator Amanda Foster arrived from Santiago 3 days later, she immediately recognized the significance of Whitney's final recordings. The coordinates matched known poaching hotspots that hadn't been identified until years after Whitney's disappearance. The names in the journal connected to individuals who would later be investigated for wildlife trafficking, people whose illegal activities wouldn't come to light for another decade. Foster's examination of the tent revealed more disturbing details. The cuts in the fabric showed signs of struggled diagonal slashes, consistent with someone trying to escape or defend themselves. Trace evidence collected from the tent's interior included blood stains that, despite years of exposure, still held enough genetic material for testing. The location of the tent itself told part of the story. It was found nearly 12 kilometers from Whitney's original base camp, in an area that had never been included in the initial search grid. The spot provided a clear view of an unmarked valley that Foster would later identify as a primary trafficking route for moving poached animals out of the park. Most damning was a series of coded notes in Whitney's journal that, when deciphered, detailed a systematic operation involving park personnel. One name appeared repeatedly: Miguel Torres, a senior park official who had helped coordinate the original search efforts in 1992. The very man who had directed search teams away from this area had been deeply involved in the illegal wildlife trade. Grant Garcia flew to Chile immediately upon hearing the news. Standing in the evidence room, holding his ex-wife's recovered journal, he finally understood why Whitney had seemed distracted and concerned during their last phone conversation. She had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than aggressive pumas or treacherous terrain. The discovery forced a complete reevaluation of the original investigation. Sheriff Morales, now nearing retirement, returned to active duty to oversee the reopened case. The evidence preserved in that torn tent had survived years of Patagonian winters, protected by the very landscape that had kept Whitney's fate hidden for so long. Foster's team spent weeks analyzing every detail from the tent site. They found CES of boot prints preserved in old mud, now hardened to stone, that matched a type of military-style boot popular among poachers. Fibers caught in the tent's zipper matched cargo nets commonly used to transport live animals. The map proved to be the most valuable piece of evidence. Whitney had marked not only poaching sites, but also temporary camps and helicopter landing zones. She had documented an entire network of illegal activity, creating a detailed picture of an operation that would continue to flourish for years after her disappearance. As Foster pieced together the evidence, a clear picture emerged of Whitney's final days. She hadn't simply vanished into the wilderness. She had witnessed something she was never meant to see. The torn tent wasn't just evidence of a crime. It was Whitney's final testimony, preserved by time and fate until the truth could finally emerge. The discovery set in motion a chain of events that would unravel decades of corruption and expose an international wildlife trafficking network. Whitney Garcia's last field study had evolved into something far more dangerous than wildlife research. It had become a detailed documentation of criminal activity that would ultimately cost her her life. The discovery of Whitney's torn tent transformed the case overnight, bringing modern investigative techniques to bear on a decades-old mystery. Amanda Foster's arrival marked a turning point, introducing specialized wildlife crime expertise that had been absent from the original investigation. Foster began by creating a comprehensive digital map overlay, combining Whitney's hand-drawn markings with known poaching incidents from the past 2 decades. The pattern that emerged was undeniable. Whitney had unknowingly documented the early stages of what would become one of South America's largest wildlife trafficking operations. The list of names found in Whitney's journal provided the first concrete leads. Foster cross-referenced each one against international wildlife crime databases, revealing connections that spanned continents. Several of the names matched suspects in ongoing trafficking investigations across Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. One name in particular stood out: Miguel Torres, the former park official who had been instrumental in the original search efforts. Working methodically, Foster's team reconstructed the trafficking network's hierarchy. Bank records revealed suspicious payments to Torres spanning years, always just below reporting thresholds. His phone records from 1992, though incomplete, showed frequent calls to numbers associated with known wildlife traffickers in the weeks before Whitney's disappearance. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Foster discovered discrepancies in the original search patterns. Areas that should have been primary search zones had been deliberately avoided, marked as too dangerous or already cleared in Torres' reports. These same areas aligned perfectly with the trafficking routes Whitney had documented. Grant Garcia provided crucial insight into Whitney's final weeks. Reviewing their last email exchanges, he identified subtle references to unusual activity. She had observed helicopter flights at odd hours, unauthorized vehicles in restricted areas, and strange cargo movements at night. At the time, these details had seemed insignificant. Now they painted a picture of a woman unknowingly documenting criminal activities. Foster's investigation revealed a sophisticated operation that used the park's remote locations to capture and transport exotic species. The demand came primarily from wealthy collectors in Asian markets, where rare Andean wildlife commanded extraordinary prices. Whitney's research sites had overlapped with the traffickers' preferred hunting grounds, placing her in direct conflict with their operations. The forensic examination of the tent yielded crucial physical evidence. Despite years of exposure, DNA analysis identified blood from 3 distinct sources. One matched Whitney's profile, while the others pointed to 2 different male contributors. Soil samples from the site contained trace elements consistent with helicopter fuel, confirming the presence of unauthorized aircraft. As Foster delved deeper, she uncovered a pattern of strategic appointments within the Park Service. Tours had gradually positioned sympathetic officials in key roles, creating a network of corruption that facilitated the trafficking. Operation. Documentation found in Whitney's journal suggested she had begun to notice these connections, though she hadn't yet understood their full significance. The breakthrough came when Foster's team identified a series of shell companies linked to Tours and his associates. These entities had been used to purchase specialized equipment, tranquilizer guns, animal transport crates, and tracking devices. The paper trail revealed a complex financial network designed to hide the true nature of their operations. The evidence mounted day by day. Foster's investigation uncovered encrypted communications, hidden bank accounts, and a web of international connections that explained how the trafficking operation had remained hidden for so long. Whitney's detailed observations, preserved in her recovered journal, provided the historical context that linked everything together. The new investigation moved with careful precision, building an airtight case against those responsible. Foster knew that after 26 years, there could be no room for error. Every piece of evidence was meticulously documented and verified, creating a comprehensive picture of both the trafficking operation and its connection to Whitney's fate. As the case progressed, it became clear that Whitney's disappearance had been more than a simple act of silencing a witness. Her detailed documentation had posed a fundamental threat to an operation that would eventually grow into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. The torn tent, hidden away in the Patagonian wilderness, had preserved not only the evidence of her final moments, but also the proof needed to dismantle the very network she had unknowingly exposed. The pieces of the puzzle finally came together on a cold morning in April 2018, when Amanda Foster laid out all the evidence across the conference room walls at the Chilean National Police headquarters. The torn tent fragments, Whitney's recovered journal, and hundreds of photographs created a timeline that spanned 26 years of deception and criminal enterprise. Foster had spent weeks analyzing Whitney's final journal entries, comparing them with satellite imagery from 1992. The coordinates Whitney had meticulously recorded matched perfectly with current known poaching hotspots. She hadn't just stumbled upon random illegal activity. She had unknowingly mapped out the entire trafficking operation in its infancy. The breakthrough came when Foster's team decrypted a series of seemingly random numbers in the margins of Whitney's journal. They weren't research notes as originally assumed, but rather tail numbers from illegal helicopter flights. Cross-referencing these numbers with aviation records revealed a pattern of unregistered aircraft movements, all connected to a shell company owned by Miguel Tours. Tours' involvement cast a dark shadow over the original investigation. As a senior park official in 1992, he had deliberately steered search teams away from the areas where Whitney had disappeared. His phone records from that period showed a flurry of calls to known wildlife traffickers in the hours after her last radio transmission. The surveillance operation that followed proved decisive. Foster's team tracked the modern-day trafficking routes, which precisely matched the locations Whitney had marked on her map. Hidden cameras captured nighttime helicopter landings in the same valleys where Whitney had noted suspicious activity 26 years earlier. The operation hadn't just continued, it had flourished, using the very same methods she had documented. When the arrests began, they happened swiftly and simultaneously. Tours was apprehended at his Santiago home, while his associates were taken into custody across 3 countries. The evidence recovered from Whitney's tent proved crucial in obtaining search warrants that uncovered decades of detailed trafficking records. The confession came from an unexpected source. Carlos Ramirez, a junior ranger in 1992, had carried the burden of knowledge for 26 years. He had witnessed Whitney's final moments but had been too terrified to come forward. His testimony painted a horrifying picture of her last day alive. Whitney had been photographing what she believed to be unusual puma behavior when she accidentally captured images of poachers loading tranquilized animals into a helicopter. According to Ramirez, Whitney had attempted to retreat to her research tent, located away from her base camp. The poachers, led by Torres himself, had tracked her down. The struggle that ensued was brief but violent. Whitney had fought back, managing to hide her journal and map before she was overwhelmed. The tense, distinctive tears matched Ramirez's account of the attack. Grant Garcia's voice trembled as he listened to the details of his ex-wife's final moments. Whitney had died, protecting the very animals she had dedicated her life to studying. Her detailed documentation, preserved in that weather-beaten tent, had finally exposed a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for more than 2 decades. The investigation revealed the true scope of the trafficking operation. Hundreds of endangered animals had been captured and smuggled out of Torres del Paine, destined for private collectors across Asia. The operation had grown from local poaching to an international criminal network worth millions of dollars annually. Whitney's remains were finally recovered from a remote cave system, guided by Ramirez's confession. The site bore all the markers she had documented in her final notes: unauthorized trail markings, unusual gear caches, and signs of regular helicopter activity. Even in death, her researcher's eye for detail had helped build the case that would bring her killers to justice. Foster's investigation had done more than solve a decades-old murder. It had exposed the largest wildlife trafficking operation in South American history, leading to the arrest of 5 key figures and the identification of dozens more across multiple continents. Whitney Garcia's final field study had evolved into something far more significant than she could have imagined. It had become the key to dismantling an international criminal enterprise that had eluded authorities for more than 2 decades. The resolution of Whitney Garcia's case brought sweeping changes to Torres del Paine National Park and wildlife protection across South America. In the aftermath of the arrests, the true impact of her final documentation began to emerge, reaching far beyond the borders of Chile and transforming how environmental crimes were investigated worldwide. The prosecution of the 5 main suspects proceeded with methodical precision. Miguel Torres, facing multiple charges including murder and wildlife trafficking, attempted to negotiate a plea deal by revealing additional connections within the illegal wildlife trade. His testimony exposed a network that stretched from the remote valleys of Patagonia to luxury apartments in Shanghai and Beijing, where wealthy collectors paid enormous sums for endangered Andean species. The evidence recovered from Whitney's tent proved instrumental in securing convictions. Her detailed maps and observations, combined with Carlos Ramirez's testimony, created an unassailable timeline of events leading to her death. The jury took less than 6 hours to return guilty verdicts for all 5 defendants, with Torres receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The recovery of Whitney's remains brought a bittersweet closure to those who had searched for her. The cave where she was found became a testament to both the darkness of human greed and the unwavering dedication of those who fight to protect wildlife. Park rangers installed a small memorial plaque at the site, marking not just the location of her death, but the beginning of a new era in wildlife protection. Grant Garcia established the Whitney Garcia Foundation for Wildlife Protection, using the compensation from civil lawsuits against the traffickers to fund anti-poaching initiatives across South America. The foundation specialized in providing advanced tracking technology and training to park rangers, ensuring that future researchers would have better protection in the field. Amanda Foster's investigation led to significant reforms in park security protocols. Torres del Paine implemented a comprehensive monitoring system, combining satellite surveillance with regular aerial patrols. The Park Service underwent a complete restructuring, with new oversight measures designed to prevent the kind of systemic corruption that had allowed the trafficking operation to flourish. The international impact of the case resonated throughout the wildlife conservation community. Law enforcement agencies worldwide began adopting the investigative techniques Foster had employed, creating specialized units dedicated to combating wildlife TR. Trafficking. The Garcia Protocol became standard procedure for investigating environmental crimes, emphasizing the connection between wildlife protection and organized crime. The exposure of the Asian market connections led to unprecedented cooperation between South American and Asian law enforcement agencies. Joint task forces were established, resulting in dozens of additional arrests and the rescue of hundreds of endangered animals. The market for illegal wildlife trade in the region saw its first significant decline in decades. Whitney's research, incomplete though it was, gained new significance in light of the case's resolution. Her observations about puma behavior patterns, recorded alongside her documentation of criminal activity, provided valuable insights into how poaching operations affect predator populations. The scientific community posthumously recognized her contributions, establishing a research grant in her name for women studying large carnivore conservation. Local communities around Torres del Paine experienced their own transformation. The arrest of corrupt officials and the dismantling of the trafficking network created opportunities for legitimate ecotourism and scientific research to flourish. Former poaching routes were converted into monitored wildlife corridors, allowing for better study and protection of the park's endangered species. Grant Garcia made one final journey to Whitney's recovered tent site in the spring of 2019. Standing where she had made her last stand, he could finally understand the full scope of what she had discovered and the courage she had shown in documenting it. The mountains that had kept her secret for so long now stood as silent guardians of her legacy. The case's resolution brought more than just criminal justice. It sparked a fundamental change in how society views environmental crimes. Whitney Garcia's death, tragic as it was, had exposed the intricate connections between wildlife trafficking and organized crime, leading to stronger international laws and enforcement mechanisms. Today, Torres del Paine stands as a model for protected area management. Its security systems and anti-poaching measures studied and replicated worldwide. Whitney's story is taught to every new ranger and researcher who enters the park, a reminder of both the risks and the importance of their mission to protect the natural world. The torn tent that had preserved the truth for 26 years now rests in a special exhibit at the park's visitor center, alongside Whitney's recovered journal and maps. Together, these artifacts tell the story of one researcher's ultimate sacrifice in the fight against wildlife trafficking and the long journey to justice that followed.